Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, from border to border and coast to coast and all ships at sea. Or, hey everybody, welcome to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. This is Clark, and with me as always is Cullen. And do you know what that first faux intro is from, Mr. McFader?
I don't know. I actually don't know.
It's connected to our film today,
okay.
Which is,
Very
of
nice.
course, The Sweet Smell of Success.
Mm-hmm.
And a tiny piece of trivia before we dive in. So, Sweet Smell of Success is kind of inspired by a super famous columnist from the 30s and 40s who's was named Walter Winchell, and he had a radio program, a super famous radio program, and that's how he opened every single episode of his program. So obviously we have people listening who are not just from America. That would be really cool if we had some people listening from ships at sea. That would be awesome. I don't think that's happening, but that would be cool. Anybody out there listening from a ship, please, when you're able, drop us a line and let us know that you're doing so.
We can do some more nautical themed episodes. I think we've only really done Titanic thus far. So
yeah, I think you're right. Maybe we could do Poseidon Adventure or something like that someday. Anyway, so I just thought I'd throw that in there because he had a famous opening. I thought,
Burt Lancaster as J.J. Hunsecker, world-famed columnist whose gossip is gospel to 60 million readers. Tony Curtis as Sidney Falco, the kid who had ideas about taking over.
But we happen to know I'm your star pupil because I reflect back to you your own talent.
I'd hate to take a bite of you. You're a cookie full of arsenic.
Don't turn your back on him. You might find a knife in it. This is their story, and that of the big shots and big names who worship the sweet smell of success. Along Broadway, throughout Hollywood, down Wall Street, on Capitol Hill, sweet smell of success.
We're friends, Hobby. We go as far back as when you were a fresh kid congressman, don't we?
Why is it that everything you say sounds like a threat?
Maybe it's a mannerism, because I don't threaten friends. But why furnish your enemies with ammunition? And here you are, out in the open, where any hep person knows that this one is toting that one around for you.
Sidney is a great salesman. He'd sell anything to get there. Just ask his girl.
Sidney, I don't do this sort of thing.
What sort of thing?
This sort of thing.
You need him for a favor, don't you? Well, so do I. I need his column tonight.
All you think about is yourself and your column. You see yourself as some sort of a national glory. To me, and lots of people like me, your slimy scandal and your phony patriotics. To me, Mr. Hunsecker, you're a national disgrace.
Burt Lancaster as the almighty J.J. Hunsecker. Tony Curtis as his man of all dirty work. Introducing Susan Harrison and the Chico Hamilton Quintet.
JJ, please. Look, I can explain.
Why you put your hands on my sister?
JJ. I didn't do anything. Stop!
But yes, here we are. This is not Walter Winchell. This is Clark and Cullen, and we're here to discuss The Sweet Smell of Success. And as we always do, let's talk about our personal experience with the film. Sounds like maybe this is your first experience with the film,
Yeah,
but let's
I'd never seen
let's
this. Yeah.
okay, great. So I'm introducing you to a new film. Awesome.
Hmm.
Tell me about your viewing experience then, just at a high level. Did you dig the film? Were you bored? Did you, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, this is a really I enjoyed this. I used to be really into noir movies when I was younger, so
Right?
it
When you
kind
were
of
even younger.
even younger, exactly. Yeah, I used to really like the film noirs from the 40s and things like that, like the detective movies and all that.
Mm,
And so this isn't quite, it's not like a crime, detective procedural, but
no,
it is very noir in its both its look and its writing, its themes. And so I
totally.
was immediately
It's
kind of drawn into
ending.
that. Yeah, it's
Yep.
of course, yeah, it's ending. I was immediately drawn in by that. And the fact that it's a noir from kind of the end of that era. It's 1957, so it was not. I thought that was really fascinating to
Mm-hmm.
me, that this movie
Yeah.
feels like it could have come
Been a
out
much
15
earlier
years
film.
prior.
Yeah.
And yet, I mean, that's not a criticism. That's just sort of an interesting, note that I made while I was watching it. That it really does, like the writing. In our little conversation prior, we kind of discussed how, like, in about 10 years the Hollywood new wave is coming in,
Right.
it's so close
Gonna
to
shake
something that is
everything up.
so incredibly different. And even a few years before that, you have like James Bond, and even contemporarily with this movie, Hollywood was all into like big epics and westerns and musicals, like these huge,
Mm-hmm.
stage, almost stage productions on the screen kind
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
And this is nothing like any of those. So it's a really interesting film from that standpoint, but also its actual subject matter is really fascinating to me, because it's almost like a time capsule of a bygone era, which, like,
Mm,
suppose that's one of the reasons that film is a very interesting art form, that it is kind of a time capsule.
totally.
But this one,
Yes.
especially in terms of its story, is so specific to this era that it almost
Mm-hmm.
feels like a bit foreign to a contemporary audience, because so many of the things that they're
Yeah.
dealing with in this are like totally irrelevant
Yeah.
to contemporary culture. and
Yeah.
and yet, um, a movie's good when it can sell those things and make you care about them, despite the fact that it might seem kind of silly and antiquated that there's, like, that press agents and tabloid, journalists
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all these sort of
Yeah.
editorial things had such sway in culture. Although I will say, I'm a big fan of Sex and the City, and Carrie Bradshaw pretty much had the same job. So there you go. It's
Wow. Well,
basically
I have
a
to
film
say,
noir
I'm
Sex and the City.
wow, interesting. I'm totally oblivious to what Sex and the City was about. I had no idea that that's what Carrie Bradshaw did, and I
Mhm.
think knowing who Carrie Bradshaw's character was, because who she was played by,
Sarah Jessica Parker, yeah.
right. Matthew Broderick's wife, if I'm not mistaken. That's,
Hmm.
I think, maybe the only thing that I know about that whole show. So interesting. I've learned something new. I didn't know you were a fan. Well,
It's a
yeah. I
guilty
mean,
pleasure, guilty pleasure.
yeah, totally understandable. I've got my own. My kind of personal relationship and kind of initial experience with this film, not too dissimilar from yours in that this is not my first viewing, but I'd only seen the film one time before, and honestly, not that long ago. I think probably a couple of years ago, first time I had seen the film, and I've been kind of going through and maybe still am a little bit kind of a noir, not just a noir, but just really going back and looking at a lot of films from the 40s, the 50s, and just experience them often for the first time. I mean, maybe some of these I saw when I was younger, but a lot of these, there's just so many films and there's not so much time. And maybe part of it is that, maybe part of it is just kind of a boredom with modern films. I don't know, but I seem like I'm going back and either revisiting films or experiencing them for the first time from older eras. Just films that I just had slipped through my cracks or just hadn't had time to see. This
Mm-hmm.
happened to be one of them. So, so who knows? I mean, I just, it could have been something as simple as like, okay, let's grab some kind of list and let's see what films, best films from the 50s, and just look through it until I'd like, found one I hadn't seen yet. So I don't know if that's what happened with this for me or not. It might have even been something like, oh, Criterion Collection, they just released this, and I went out and just bought it a couple of years ago. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember the first viewing, and I totally loved it. And so the reasons why I picked it, right off the bat, a couple of things that stood out to me that for me, I just loved. Number one, the dialogue. I absolutely love the dialogue in this film. It is like, it's so snappy, it's so crisp, sharp. It just ricochets between the characters and off the screen right into your ears. There are not a lot of films written in this way, and it is highly stylized, and so we're just the grammar of film and style and kind of where we're at with it. We don't generally do this kind of thing much anymore with film, and honestly, even for its era, this was really stylized dialogue. So that's the first thing, and I thought, well, this will be really fun to talk about. The other thing was that I just absolutely loved the cinematography, this black and white photography from James Wong Ho. And I'd known him from the movie Seconds, Frankenheimer's Seconds, with Rock Hudson, which is one of my favorite films of all time. I just love the look of that film. And so, yeah, those two things stood out to me. And that together with, really tight story, tight pacing, great performances, I was like, this will be a groovy flick to talk about. There's just so much goodness here. And I thought it would be fun too. You had kind of mentioned how it was a time capsule, and which of course, all old films are. It's one of the beautiful things about film, as you described, that, it's in my mind, I always kind of think that cinema is the closest thing we've got to a time machine. You can go back and you can see landscapes, you can see cityscapes, you can look at, and watch the performances of people who are no longer with us, who are long gone, and they're brought back to life with the magic of cinema. And you can also, even, of course, not in this film, but you can also see imagined futures. Obviously, of course, they're not literally traveling into the future, but we can see imagined futures. And sometimes some aspects of those imagined futures can almost scarily become close to reality once those futures are realized. So it's I've actually got this like funky theory. I'm not going to go into it here, but I've got this like funky theory how like films that are really effective time travel films, like let's say Back to the Future, maybe someday we'll do that film on this podcast.
I actually just watched the trilogy.
I feel like they're like when it's done well, it's like the perfect film, because you have this like meta multi-level thing going on where you've got a film that is explicitly about time travel in a medium that is explicitly about the manipulation of time. I mean, literally what makes cinema is editing. It's the manipulation of time. And of course, then like you had stated, film is kind of like this time capsule. So you have that element, and then you have a film that is about time travel, and you kind of when you add all those kind of layers together, anyway, I think you've got the potential for a fantastic film, which is what I would say Back to the Future is. Anyway, coming back to Sweet Smell of Success, so that's my kind of initial experience with it and kind of why I picked it. I just thought it was a fantastic example of both a Hollywood film from this era of cinema, and I thought it was a great example of a film noir. So,
yeah, I just want to also say about the about the dialogue too, that on a general note, if anyone's listening and they haven't gone back and watched either this film or like one of my favorite movies is Sullivan's Travels, which is a few years before this, but it's decade and a half before this. A lot of movies from this era are surprisingly funny, snappy. Like not surprisingly to someone who's seen them, but perhaps someone who hasn't gone back kind of thinks like these are all dated, boring schmaltzy things.
Yeah. Oh, what is this going to have?
Find yourself coming back and laughing harder than you have at anything that came out in the last 5 years or anything like that. Like you really should give a lot of things from this era a chance, because they are written so
Really,
well and crafted so well. So.
And can we just talk about, let's go into that a little bit more. So a lot of aspects of this film let's talk about, but since I think you and I both seem to agree that the writing, especially the dialogue, is one of the aspects of this film that's really like front and center. It's one of the first things you notice, and I think it's one of the strongest aspects of the film. But yeah, it's interesting. So I'm, kind of some context. I mean, I think you're right. If for people listening, if you've not gone back and looked at some of these older films, because I think we kind of maybe automatically just have this response of, well, like, how's it going to be relevant to me? Especially younger people. And I was the same way too. Everybody is. When you're younger, your context for things is just limited, because you've just not been on the earth, for very long. And so your context is kind of narrow, and I think it's just, we all kind of operate with this almost just inherent, kind of way of thinking about things, which is like, only contemporary things will speak to me. Now, clearly, this is generalization. It's not everybody's like this, but I think to some degree, when we're younger, we're all a little more of this mindset. But yeah, it's amazing how many things translate, right? So the inspiration for this film, the Walter Winchell character, right? Well, we don't have this anymore. Matter of fact, I didn't know any of this background or history about this film until I started reading about it after I'd actually seen it. I mean, the film doesn't. You don't have to know any kind of details about this. You can get this from just the film. There's a guy, he writes a column. He's got a lot of power. He can make and break careers, and he's famous in his own right? Okay, well, boom. That translates to all kinds of things today. Okay, then you've got, a combination of, connections this guy has that he relies on, and they rely on him. Basically, it's the ecosystem, or the trade on information. Well, yeah. Sure, that exists today, and we can translate that to any other kind of different technology as opposed to a newspaper column, right? No problem. And maybe one of the strongest aspects of the film that will always translate is the human condition. It's still the same. We're still people. People want power. People will bend and then break their own moral codes for, for a chance at power, right? I mean, it's in the title of the movie. It's that sweet smell of success,
Yes.
It's addictive, right? It's like those cartoons where you have like the wafting, like, smell cloud comes, and it like literally, I don't, do you remember this? It's like, it would be
like Pepe Le Pew coming in,
and it would literally like pull the character invisibly by their nostrils or something,
to the pie in the windowsill.
Yeah, it's like I think, I mean, so all of these things transcend, right? They transcend any time. I didn't have to know any of this context about Walter Winchell and the power that he had in real life, and that he even had, I think it was a daughter, that there was maybe some rumors of, potentially, inappropriate relationship there, and that they even kind of brought that in with Burt Lancaster's character and the relationship he has with her sister, which we'll kind of get to. So yeah, all this stuff, I think it helps, it makes a film deeper when you know that context, but God, it all translates great. And so does this stylized dialogue. It is, I mean, it is so crisp. It's so sharp. It like you had said, yes, this is a film noir. It's got one of those great, like, horrible endings where everybody's worse off at the end. Like, literally every character is worse off. Every main character is worse off, at the end of this film. Nobody gets what they want. Everybody basically gets the opposite of what they want, right? Which I love. I have to admit, I love that. I love that about noir. Maybe that's just like my melancholy kind of like inherent disposition coming through, but I love it. But here's what it made me think of. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. So it's like, I remember when I was a kid, it's like in high school, Pulp Fiction comes out. Quentin Tarantino's exploding onto the scene. Now, obviously, he had done Reservoir Dogs before this, but really it was with Pulp Fiction. I remember hearing, reading, seeing everywhere. Like, people had like two things immediately they talked about this film. I feel like, one, the violence. Geez, you go back and look at that film. It is compared. I mean, what's violent about it now compared to, you know what I mean?
What comes up? Yeah. Even Prestige TV is like more violent than that today.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, for sure. So you had like, I mean, Sesame Street's practically more violent. Okay, not really, but
That's
um,
not that Elmo's naturally, blue,
yeah,
but he's just covered in blood.
just covered in blood. Oh God, yeah, totally. Oh my gosh. Um, I have something else to add to that, but I won't. It's horrible. So I'm just not gonna do it. I love Elmo. I love you, Sesame Street. I'm not gonna do that. But but I remember that people talked about violence, and then they talked about the dialogue. Oh my gosh, this dialogue, like it's so, it's just it's this rich, nuanced, and hysterical. It's funny. I mean, look at this two hit guys like standing in a hallway talking about foot massages. It's
Mhm.
like, and I remember everybody talking about that. And what kind of like that, whoa, what, and in my young mind I was like, oh God, yeah, that it must be that like nobody's ever written dialogue like this. Geez, everybody's talking about it like it's never existed in a film before. I guess it
Mhm.
hasn't. And then you go watch this film, and of course there are many others, many others, but this is a great example of it. Okay, boom, you go back 40 years from when Pulp Fiction was released, and now, geez, how many years? It's scary how many years away we are from 1957 now. um
I can
but
tell you exactly.
tell me exactly. But now obviously it's a totally different style, but I mean, that level of dialogue is here
Mhm.
between Burt Lancaster and Tony Curtis, between their characters here in this film, and all the other characters too, by the way. Everybody, with the exception, I think, of Susan's character, is written well. It's Susan and Dallas's character, but we'll get into kind of how different characters express themselves, maybe.
Mhm.
But the script as a whole, and especially between J.J. Hunsecker, which is Burt Lancaster's character, and Sidney Falco, Curtis's character, you have just this. It is just super stylized, super quick. It's just ricocheting all over the place. It's just such a joy to listen to it. It's so entertaining. And I guess that's what I almost immediately thought of. And I'm just like, part of me is sad that we don't have more dialogue this good, that there is not a level of writing this good in more things, whether it's that prestige television that you talked about or whether it's film. And I feel like what we consider really great dialogue today is really far from removed from the true watermarks of dialogue in the history of cinema, of which I would consider this one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I just think it's also one of these things that people often mistakenly think of, just to go back to that, what you mentioned about Pulp Fiction as well, which is like this idea that I think because people maybe don't have the words to describe it accurately, they sort of say, oh, yeah, Quentin Tarantino's dialogue is so realistic.
Mm,
And I think it's not realistic. It's like heightened realism. It's like it's grounded in that it is often kind of conversational and
yeah,
not,
it's
and you see that in this film as
and
well. There
not
is
plot directed. Yeah.
exactly, and so it's realistic in air quotes in the sense that yeah, it's not just very blatant exposition, and yet it's doing
Right.
so much character work, and it is
Yeah.
very heightened too, and it's very
Yes.
melodramatic, and this film is
Yeah.
very melodramatic. um,
Yes.
and that's something that I love. I love melodrama. That's kind of like a lost art these days.
Yeah.
Because I think
But they
people are
do
kind
it.
of people are kind of
It is.
embarrassed about being very sincere and earnest
Yeah.
a lot
Yep.
these days, and yet in here, you've got these, quite frankly, like kind of beautiful moments of contrast between
Mm.
our main characters, these media snakes, as they're so often described in the
Mm.
film,
Mm.
who are only interested in their next story, have really zero interest in what affects people other than their immediate interests.
Hmm.
Of course, Burt Lancaster cares deeply about his sister. Um,
Like, I think a little too deeply,
a little
but
too deeply. Yeah,
yeah,
the picture on the
I
desk is a little bit weird.
it's really creepy. It's
Yeah.
it's the definitely the creepiest aspect of this film, and I mean, I don't mean to digress too much. We'll get back to what you're talking about, but yeah, it's
Mhm.
another, I think, common aspect of the film noir, and it makes you think of like Chinatown, and which I would consider as
Oh
a
yeah.
film noir film as well. But yeah, this is Yes, this kind of like this hinted at incestuous relationship between JJ and
Hmm.
his sister Susan. Yes, but please continue. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I just think that it's like you do have these kind of moments of moral clarity, perhaps with
Yeah.
uh the
Fast
our
and
characters
fleeting though.
Dallas, yeah, exactly, and it's like
Yeah.
you've got where people do stand up, and it's clear that we've spoken about this before on the show, but the idea that just because a film has a main character who is not a great person does not mean the film is itself endorsing the
Right.
actions of these characters, right? And so, despite the fact that you spend most of the movie with these very kind of sleazy guys who sell off any of their relatives really to make like a quick buck,
Yeah.
you also at the same time do see that the film is kind of almost using that as a way to contrast the goodness in people too, and like what is the what you immediately side with Dallas, and I'm blanking on her name right
Do
now,
you?
but
Do you? Okay, let's
well,
talk.
in a sense, you kind of like you when he's standing up to Burt Lancaster and telling him how he really feels, you're kind of like,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a catharsis, at least from
No,
my
yeah,
view.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get there. Let's get there in a minute. I mean, a couple things that I want to talk about, and I think interesting how these things kind of impact film. But you talk about how you can have characters who are not doing good things, right? They are quote unquote bad. I don't know, evil. But they're immoral. How about, let's say you have quote unquote immoral characters, but that doesn't mean the film is condoning immoral behavior necessarily. And it's interesting to think about the film code that existed at the time.
Yeah,
right?
Hays Code.
So
Yeah.
the Hays Code that existed up until I think like the late 60s, if I'm not mistaken. I think from like 34 to 68, somewhere around there. The Hays Code existed, and I'm not an expert on this, but it's my understanding that part of it was like a self-imposed kind of censorship, basically, that the film industry pushed onto itself. And the reason they did so was to avoid outside censorship. Their idea was like, well, it would be better if we censor ourselves and we have the power to do that instead of giving that power to the government or some other entity or something.
Yeah.
And so this Hays Code, like you said, existed. But one of the aspects of that Hays Code was that, okay, if you wanted to show, characters who were immoral, who were not ethically motivated, let's say, for their, for the behaviors they had on screen, that you had to then kind of balance that with having those characters, get their just desserts.
Yeah, they had to lose,
and,
essentially.
Like they had to lose. And so I think in a lot of ways, that code actually kind of imposed so much of what is film noir, which is they're like, okay, well, we want to show these characters. We want to show whether gangsters or we want to show cheats, and we want to show people whose ambition has turned them into power hungry, dishonest, unethical people, whatever the case may be. And okay, we want to show those characters, and we don't want to be didactic and preachy. And so how are we going to do that? Well, how do you do that? Show them, having a horrible ending, of some type or another, right? Yeah. And so this is kind of what happens here, right? The only character that ends up having even kind of remotely a positive ending is JJ's sister, Susan.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
She basically, we see her leave in the end, and but even that is kind of ominous in a sense. She just walks out alone into the streets in the city of New York,
with Dallas in the hospital, and
Dallas is in the hospital. She's left her brother, who she lived with, so she's left her home, and she feels horrible about every character that she had a relationship with, basically, And so who knows what she's going to go off to. It might be a happy ending, but certainly the film doesn't give us any indication that that's a guarantee at all. So it's just fascinating to me that something like a censorship code could have been the thing that led to that, potentially.
And it's interesting to just kind of like touch on the Hays Code just a second more. Is that it's
sure.
It's one of those things I almost feel like I of course am not pro Hays Code, and yet I
Yeah.
think when you have
Wait, is that like pros hate? Is that what we have T-shirts and you put out like
yeah,
pro Hays
or
Code? Like
it was a button. You put a button on your shirt.
Bring the Hays Code back,
But I think that the interesting thing is when you get these restrictions that you have directors, writers, filmmakers in general have to come up with very interesting ways to kind of subvert them that
oh yes,
sort of stay on the inside, explicitly, and yet what is the
it's
subtext
literally
here?
you stay on this. Yes, you're staying
Yeah.
on the inside of the code in a literal sense, right? It's like, well, you
Yeah.
can't say XYZ. Okay, then I'm going to make that a rich part of the subtext, which frankly works so much better anyway. But yes,
And it's interesting, like you have movies, for example, like High Noon, which was then, came out and was kind of branded as like, Soviet communist propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And so they remade it into Rio Bravo, which had a much more kind of individualistic, theme to it and about like, less of a communal theme, because that was seen as propaganda. And but you look at High Noon, and if anyone's seen that, and it's a really great example of that, where it's like, of course, they were found out doing it, and yet it's kind of this thing that you see all these very interesting movies, and I think that Sweet Smell of Success is one of them, where it's like you're, to a film censor board, perhaps the this worked and this was clean because the character's lost in the end and things like that. And yet you find that it's a lot more complicated than that. That who you are actually, engaging with scene to scene and who you want to see win changes almost constantly. I mentioned that moment when Dallas is standing up to Lancaster and sort of saying like, you're basically saying what everyone would want to say to him, because he is a pretty ruthless character throughout the movie.
Yeah.
And yet you also have throughout the whole movie, you almost kind of want to see Falco like succeed in this weird way, because you're kind of along on the ride with him. And so, anytime he is trying to get a scoop on somebody or whatever, you're kind of like, I hope he, and I think that that's a really interesting aspect of, not only this film, but noir in general.
Well,
it so often puts you, exactly, like, because just basically on the basis of spending an extended period of time with this person and understanding their motivations, you're almost automatically going to empathize with them on some level. I just saw Heat last night, and it's a very similar thing where it's like, you kind of hope that Robert De Niro gets away with it, despite the fact that he is he is the criminal and he's he's doing the bad stuff. But you're sitting there like when he decides to veer off, you're like, no, just go for the plane. And you kind of get that feeling in this too, where it's like you're sitting there, hoping in a weird way that Falco succeeds. And I think that really also causes you to kind of engage with yourself, which I think is a really, what cinema, even art beyond just cinema, should be doing to you, which is that it should make you kind of ask a question about how do you see the world? Why was it that you wanted this person to succeed? How does empathy work? And so I think in a weird way, like something like a Hays Code, it forces these people to be a little bit like to be more creative, and in a sense also forces an audience to dig into subtext. Now, I'm sure a lot of it went over people's heads then, just as it would now. And yet when you just have that subtext in there, you're still some people are automatically just going to subconsciously understand it. Like, you may not have gotten it, but your brain did. And it's sitting in there and kind of stewing for a bit, and it'll make you think, even if you don't fully understand what it is you're thinking about, what it is you're kind of reconciling with. So that's kind of,
I mean, well, it absolutely. I mean, I think, not to go too far down this rabbit hole much longer, but I mean, anytime. I mean, I think, look, the Hays Code, I would never want to go back to an era like that. But of course, we still have similar things. I mean, in the United States, we have, the G, PG, PG-13, rated R, and that's it's not censorship per se, but it's definitely, that there are people who will always want to restrict or label, content in art, and that's just the way that is. But I think you're but there's so much value there to be had. Forcing yourself as a creator to not just say exactly what you mean,
Yeah.
and to really work towards subtlety, nuance, and subtext. And maybe that's part of why, I don't know. I mean, is that why so much of what we have now, if you compare this to the dialogue, for example, let's say compare the dialogue in this film to the dialogue of the most popular films and television to this day, it's like I unfortunately watched one or two episodes of this, like here in the U.S., Cullen. I don't know if it's popular there, but there's this television, like I think now it's like a series of series. Like there's a bunch of spin-offs and all kinds of stuff, but it's the oh Lord, what is it? Yellowstone.
Yes, no, that's quite popular here, yeah.
And there's like spin-offs that are like stuff done by the same guy, and there's like one that's like Billy Bob Thornton plays like an oil.
They're doing like different eras now, right? Like
and now there's different eras. Like Harrison Ford is in one from like the 1800s or the early 1900s or something, and there's a bunch of spin-offs, and supposedly the guy, the creator of these shows, and apparently I don't know how, but he still writes a lot of them. I imagine that's what it really means, is that he just leads a team of writers and he puts his name on all the scripts. I don't know exactly what's going on, but supposedly this guy is one of the better or best writers in the medium right now. And it's like, oh my God, so much of that dialogue is just on the nose because they can say anything. There's no, but it's just so much of it is on the nose. It's either exposition or it's preaching or it's just really on the nose. And this is the way it is with a lot of stuff, right? Because you can, writers, you can write whatever the hell. Character can say whatever you want them to say. There's no, very little restriction in that. And there's no restriction clearly being brought from the writer themselves. Like, okay, I really want to utilize subtext here, so I want to speak, kind of sideways about it. But so all those little things I think are lost for whatever combination of variables in most films now. And to be fair, though, most of the films in this era were not written this well either. It's not to say that every single film in the 50s or 40s or whenever we're talking about, were written as well as this film is written. There's
a lot of schlock back then.
There's a lot of schlock. This is an exceptional example, and it's why we're talking about it now, right? There's, hundreds of films that were released from this era that, people don't even remember at all because, well, they're just not memorable. But yeah, it is fascinating how those kind of external, the external kind of parameters
I think
of the
even
creation
to kind of move on to like you said, hop out of that rabbit hole. A segue to that too is I think audiences. In that so much of what is made today is made to be, turned on in the background while you cook or while you're on your phone or whatever. And so it's like, how can you even really use subtext?
Streaming stuff, yeah.
This film is so well written in a sense that,
well, it demands your attention. You have to really pay attention because you'll miss a lot real fast.
Even I was sitting there with my phone off, watching it, and I found a few points where I actually would just click back to just kind of listen to what they had said, just because I wanted to make sure that I was fully recollecting what that was. And so it's somebody might say that that's a criticism of the film, but no, it's, I think, just also just
wait, what's the criticism of the film? Say this again.
The fact that I just felt like I needed to, rewind a second and watch it back. It's like, well, how?
Oh, geez, that's heartbreaking. If people think
but I think it's also just because of what we're used to nowadays. I think we both try to watch a lot of older stuff and go through it, but I think just by osmosis, we're inundated with obviously modern media or content, as they love to call it. And I think that it's so refreshing. Like, it's like taking like an ice bath to watch something where the dialogue is requiring you to think. And again, it's like this movie is almost like there's not a lot of physical action in this film. Most of the movie is well-written dialogue driving this story forward, and yet it never feels expository. It never feels like they're just sitting there saying, well, now I've got to go over to this house and see what's going on there. And,
right.
It's like, it's all, on a very general wash. It's somebody enters a scene wanting something, and it's not exactly clear what they want. Sometimes it's an emotional want. It's just sort of like a satisfaction that they want. And then there's this kind of game of cat and mouse in these moments where it's like there's a person that's either kind of catty to them and stands up to them, or there's somebody who is, you know, a little bit weaker, and you have these dynamics between characters so that the dialogue feels completely natural for what these people are saying, not necessarily in a sense that they are showing up just to get to the next page of the script, which I think is a huge issue with so much stuff that's written today. And again, like we said, that I'm sure there's a lot of stuff written in the 50s and 40s and 30s and 60s, 70s, and 80s that was written poorly as well. But this just is so sharp in the way that it decides to kind of unfold moment to moment, where it keeps you on your toes almost as much as it keeps these characters on their toes. And I think that that's one of the reasons that you do go along with Falco, and you kind of are, because you're figuring out this stuff with him, and you get invested because of that, as you listen.
Well,
and kind
and
of
the
conspire
characters
with
are
him.
smart, and
Yeah.
the characters are smart. This wasn't written down to an audience. This is written up, and it's asking you to really pay attention, and if you do, you'll be rewarded. But these characters, and it's, I think, one of the things that really works. Yes, the dialogue is very stylized, but we have, you know, writers, basically the first, you know, the two main characters, J.J. Hunsecker and Sidney Falco. They're writers. I mean, this is what they do for a living. So you've got this beautiful kind of, you know, there's this great, you know, excuse for it, if you will, for the stylized dialogue. They're writers. This is their stock and trade. And I mean, there's, you know, just a long history of great cinema and television where you have either writers or characters, maybe they're working for a newspaper, or, you know, it's almost like the last episode we did with Robert Downey Jr. and his character, and he's, you know, he's a writer, he's a journalist, and so you absolutely expect witty dialogue, you absolutely expect stylized dialogue, and it makes perfect sense, right? And let's talk a little bit about the cinematography and the direction here,
Yeah,
because I think it ties so well into this dialogue. And as you said, it's your every scene is kind of a power struggle, or somewhere, you know, somebody is either trying to extend their position. It's like chess, you know, and they're trying to line up their pieces to get as much leverage as they can. You know, it is certainly with Tony Curtis's character Sidney, as we're following him through scene to scene. But you know, the direction, I feel like, is, and you know, it's interesting. Let's talk about the director for just a minute, because we haven't really talked about him yet. So Alexander Mackendrick. Now, I was not familiar with him before having watched this film and then kind of done some prep for this podcast. I don't know if you were, but I not familiar with him. But when I started to get into him, I'm like, man, I've got to really go check out some of his other films. But he was American born, but he was a Scottish man. And his story is kind of interesting, I think, in that, you know, he had some initial success in Hollywood, or even in British television and film.
Yeah,
if I'm
he
not
worked
mistaken,
for
right?
Eaton Studios, yeah, and then they shut down.
That's Ealing Studios, and you know, so he's had some earlier films, Whiskey Galore, The Man in the White Suit, and he even had an Oscar nomination for the screenplay that he wrote for the film Maggie in '54. He did The Lady Killers in '55, which of course the Coen brothers remade many years later. But so he had success, but it's saying his career started to kind of decline in the '60s, and ultimately he ended up becoming the dean, and then was a professor too, of the Cal Arts School of Film and Video, which I had no idea. So he had this one successful career as a filmmaker, and then his kind of the second half of his career, he was a successful academic, which I thought was kind of fascinating. I couldn't think of another director just right off the top of my head who had a career structured kind of similarly to that. Not that, of course, he structured it that way on purpose from the beginning, but, you know, different circumstances, levels of, you know, success, he decided to segue and pivot into something different. But that's kind of fascinating. And by all accounts, he ended up being a really, really good teacher, which I think is so rare that you have somebody as good at their job as this. I know it sounds kind of ironic or kind of paradoxical, but sometimes I find that people who are really good in their art have a hard time teaching it
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think it just speaks to the fact that it's just really hard to be a good teacher in general, like a truly. So props to teachers out there. But it, another thing that I was reading was that, he never really saw any of his films. None of them ever really met his measure of success. And that even with Sweet Smell of Success, which was not a commercially successful film on release, and it really didn't develop, its reputation or its stature until many years later. Now it's a highly regarded film, but it wasn't back then. It was a flop, and but he had talked about this film, and he would, when he would bring it up with the students at Cal Arts, he would say, it's a deeply flawed film, and he would kind of make excuses for this, that, and the other. Now I totally get that when you're one of the primary creative forces on a project, it's really hard to not be super critical of it. I mean, everything I've ever worked on, I look on it after the fact, and all I can see are the mistakes.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
but it is. But that is interesting. But I feel like the direction here, along with the cinematography, is frankly nearly flawless. I'm curious about your thoughts, but just we have, like you said, we've got talking heads, and this film never feels like it's dragging. It never feels like I'm never spatially confused. I'm never bored. It feels like it feels like there is action going on, right? Like I'm in a restaurant, I'm in a little club, I'm out on the street outside. I'm in all of these like relatively small spaces, but they never feel that way. And I think that owes so much to the direction is subtle, but you've got a camera that is, I think, subtly lyrical, moving around spaces. Blocking is, I think, really utilized successfully here. It's like one of my favorite examples is when Sidney comes in. It's kind of near the beginning of the film. I think it's when we first actually meet JJ, if I'm not mistaken. We've been hearing about him all during the beginning, the first like 10, 15 minutes, whatever it is, we're hearing about him and really building up, really building him up as a character, which is also great writing and direction. And then finally, when Sidney kind of burst into where he's holding court in this restaurant, right, and he's got the senator and the
senator's publicist or whoever,
senator's publicist, and this beautiful woman who's next to him, and we've got, of course, then JJ sitting there on one side of the table and all these other people on the other side, and I mean, immediately we know what's going on, right? Just the blocking alone. And JJ has no place to sit. He kind of has to like seat himself behind JJ, which creates this really beautiful. It's like, on the one hand, we clearly see the power differential between these two people. JJ's not even going to scoot over for him. He's not even going to budge, right? And so JJ, almost like a child, has to like sit behind him, and kind of he's left to kind of have to like lean in and kind of
he does. I think he even
occasion.
like pulls a chair over from like another like
he has to put and but it's also it's also blocked in a way. So yes, we see the power differential, and we see that Sidney's an outsider, but we also, and of course that plays out in the dialogue as well, of course. But this is what I'm saying. This is great direction. It's great blocking, and but we also have a sense that these two are kind of, not a team in the sense that they're equal, but they're also kind of in cahoots with each other, right?
Yeah.
We kind of get a sense that they're like, they're on one side of this field and these other players are on another side. But every single one of these scenes, I think, is so effectively blocked.
Well, they're kind of like hyenas in a way. Like they're like, they're of the same breed. They're searching for the same goal, and yet they'll yap at each other and bite at each other for the bigger piece of meat, right?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
But I think I totally agree that I think that what this reminded me of, honestly, is I remember when we were doing Silence of the Lambs, there's a quote from Jonathan Demme about how he said, because the movie was so heavy with these moments of dialogue and just two people staring at each other and talking and things like that. And he didn't want it to devolve into just, shot reverse shot. He said they made a conscious effort to shoot every single scene where two people are talking in a different way. And that's kind of what I feel like here. And it's interesting, and I'm bringing this up tonight because I just saw it last night. I think that seeing Heat last night, that was one of the things that I actually noticed this time around was kind of a minor flaw about the film, was that there's so much in that movie where there's two people talking and it's just a really long lens with a really shallow depth of field, and it's just they're just staring right at each other.
And you mean
it's
just
over the shoulder, and just shot reverse shot, and I noticed that. I don't know why that happened last night, but I just think watching this and the
that
difference
never happens
there
in this film.
And people are moving around, and there's always just
you have the usage of space. You have depth
and a
of
power
focus.
dynamic in terms of the physicality of each characters. Even when Sydney goes in to see JJ's secretary, and she is so unthreatened by him that she doesn't even stand up. She doesn't even she's barely even looking at him. She's just kind of working on her own stuff the entire time.
That's almost entirely shot in the two shot. You've got a wide where you see the entire office, right? You've got her sitting at her desk. And you're right. Even though
she takes up the majority of the image too, because she's close to the camera.
Absolutely. So you've got the usage of that of not just the X and Y axis, but the Z axis. And I just mean to say that we're using the entire frame, not just in a two-dimensional kind of flat plane, which is what I feel like we get quite often. And I really like Michael Mann, but you're right. You use long lenses, you put everything out of focus in the background, and you shoot just these over-the-shoulder shots. You're really only using two dimensions. You're just using the width and the height of the frame. You're not utilizing... Matter of fact, I mean, that's exactly what happens when you use those long lenses. You're completely obliterating any depth. There's zero depth. And one of the things I love about these older films, and again, not all of them, but much more common than, I think if you were to take just the average film of this era and the average film of this era, of today, I think there was a much stronger there was a much more common usage of depth. And I think directors seem to feel more strongly about really having to have specific blocking in a scene that reinforced character, that reinforced story, that even maybe told its own story. I mean, reinforcing can sometimes mean that what's happening in the blocking is actually opposite of what's happening in the dialogue, because the blocking is reinforcing the actual subtext of what's going on. But so much and this is what I find so difficult when I try to explain to people, like, in my mind at least, what I find really lacking in today's television, because it's, we've been in this era now of the golden age of television. I think most people will agree that's kind of over, but I think we're still in this era where everybody's like, oh my gosh, look at look at the high quality of television today's day and age. I mean, it's really streaming. I don't know. I'm calling it television because that's all you watch it on a television. It's not something that's ever theatrically released, and it's usually series, right? So it's hour-long shows or 30-minute shows or whatever. So it's not cinema. It's not films, not movies. But this is one of the things that I'm sometimes challenged to kind of communicate to people. It's like, yeah, but I look at all these shows and it's just two shot over the shoulder, two shot over the shoulder. Then you have there's like a real wide, like in Yellowstone or whatever it is. Whoa, look, there's a mountain scene in Montana. Yeah. Okay, and then it's like back to two shot over the shoulder. Yeah. And even more than that though, it's like the characters are very rarely actually doing something that specifically plays into the characterizations and the plot of what's going on, or the subplot of what's going on, or the subtext of what's going on. It is, even if a character does have business, it's usually just busy work. They're like doing it just to do it, just to have movement in the frame, so that they're not just standing there. But it's so infrequently an integral part, a thought out, conscientious part of telling the story. And so to go back to your example, I think it's a great one. And every scene is an example of this in this film. We're not going to go scene by scene, but and it sounds small. I mean, maybe it sounds pedantic to some people, but this is this is cinema. It is utilizing the mise en scène that every single aspect of it is a reinforcement of your perspective as the director, and telling that story. And if you don't utilize it, it's gone, right? I mean, what's the point? But you're so right, and especially if we go back to the 50s, right? Like, it would normally be the other way around, right? But here the woman has the power, and she has the power because she's connected to JJ. So that it's all, here we are at the newspaper. This is where JJ works. JJ's not here though. He doesn't come into the office. He's up in his high rise looking over the city, right? That's telling the story. She's got this big stack of papers. She's sitting at her desk. He comes in. She doesn't even get up. That's telling the story. She takes up by far the largest part of the frame. That's telling the story. He's kind of like with the desk in between him and her. He's in the background, and he kind of comes around her, and he's kind of moving through the office. And so there's movement going on, and it's all tied to what they're talking about in the moment, the conversation they're having, of course, and that's tied to who has the power, where's the power going, and there's playfulness there. It goes to kind of all business to kind of playful, but it's and so the tone of the dialogue is kind of shifting as well. There's a dynamic there anyway, but all these things come together. Sorry, I just keep going on.
No, I want to,
but
you got brought up a really good point
that
too,
in so many,
I think that you brought up a really good point about when you were discussing kind of like this idea of like Yellowstone and kind of this like sheen, this technological sheen where it's all technically perfect and
yes, and a lot of people talk about that and
exposed
they think that
properly, and it's
they
in
call that
focus
cinema. They
yeah,
call
and,
that
and
cinema.
I think that,
right.
that is a perfect example of why technology at this point today is at a point where it's very difficult to shoot something and make it look bad. Cameras are capturing so much data these days.
It still happens, but
still,
yes.
yeah. If you are, and I don't mean bad in a like
I understand what you
good
mean.
or bad
yeah.
in a creative sense, but I just mean
it's
that
easy
like,
to be technically proficient. Like
exactly,
you can be technically proficient. You can have a television show that looks like what people would expect to see at a movie theater back in the day.
And they all just end up kind of looking like tech demos, but
yeah.
My point is that you have, I think that that's one of those things that it's like, because cameras these days are capturing just such a massive amount of information that you can do so much with the image in post that it's you almost just don't have to have the level of craftsmanship that they had back when you were shooting on a stock that was like probably like 50 ISO, these film stocks they're shooting this movie on.
You certainly don't have to have the care and preparation.
Or even the precision, because you can screw up more and fix it in post, for lack of a better term.
Or just keep shooting. Or just keep shooting because it's not film. Yeah.
And yet you see here with like how James Wong Ho shoots this movie.
He's so good.
Again, I mentioned this at the beginning, that it's of an era where you had these bright, colorful studio epics and musicals and westerns that were shot with huge lights, and everything was bright and well lit. They looked like they might have well been like on a Broadway stage, and that's where they're shot.
Like
here,
Bridge Over River Kwai was the biggest film in '57. I mean, that's an epic.
You would have had like things like Rope, or not Rope, sorry, the Robe, the and Spartacus, and like these big, Spartacus is a great movie, but the common language of cinema at this point, at least popular cinema, was bright and colorful, to differentiate itself in many ways from television.
From television, which was just emerging, yes.
Yeah, and so I think kind of two things. One, to film a movie like this, I'm almost curious if they were at the time conscious of the fact that it's like, let's shoot this like we would have shot this 15 years ago. Like, I wonder if that was kind of a conversation they had. And the second thing is the amount of skill and precision it would take to, because I think what people don't understand, perhaps that don't necessarily know a lot about the technology of the time, is that this film is dark. There's a lot of darkness. It's high contrast in the sense that there's
low key.
People's exactly. Like, often it's just like one or two light sources that seem to be illuminating these characters,
and
that
often
characters
not
are
flattering.
in shadow.
Like
Exactly.
and often,
Yeah.
like
It's
this,
harsh and it's
just quickly to take back, it's like when we first meet JJ, and
mhm.
he's like, again, holding court at that restaurant at the table. He's lit by such a strong, just, it's almost like a directly overhead light is on
Mhm.
him, to the point where he's like, there's these huge shadows like under his eyes and
Yeah.
glasses and kind of under his nose. And it is, and of course Burt Lancaster was, I mean, this is a super handsome man that,
But
it's
also
like,
apparently very intimidating in real life too,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
according
But
to
I mean,
yeah.
like, it would be like, oh, you can't make our handsome leading man ugly. Like, we can't have all these distorting shadows and all this stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, it permeates this film. And
Yeah, and
it's
even that moment, even the moment when they're backstage and they're talking at right after Dallas has kind of told JJ off, and they're,
mm,
Falco and JJ are backstage, and JJ's pissed basically and saying like, I want to ruin this guy's life, and he's completely,
yeah,
cast in this shadow. He's got one side of his face that is illuminated, but I
yeah,
think I just want to point out technically that these films, the stocks that they would have been shooting on at the time, were so low sensitivity,
mm,
in that you still needed so much light to get an exposure, that
yeah,
the amount of skill that it would take to basically flood these sets with the amount of light that you need to get exposure and yet still make it look so dark and high
yeah,
contrast is
yeah,
immense. I mean, it's that is a massive challenge for anyone who's
yeah,
ever lit something. Even with
for
digital
film.
cameras today,
Yeah,
you know that when you're trying to make something high contrast, there's just this constant guessing game in your head of like, is that too dark? Is that too bright? It's spilling over, things like that. And so the fact that they were doing this without so much as like a monitor, they didn't
yeah.
know what the shot was going to look like,
Until
and so
dailies.
I think that
Yeah,
that's kind of what I mean when I say that there was just a level of technical precision and understanding of what
yeah,
things would look like, in this era, that has been lost, and it's been lost an understandable reason, because technology improved to the point that you don't need to
yeah.
worry about that sort of thing anymore. But I almost think that
And
like,
styles and
yeah,
and
of
styles of
course, yeah,
film, and all these
um,
things, and they go hand in hand. I mean, technology impacts the style, and the style impacts technology, and it kind of, the the expectations of an audience shift, over
mhm,
time.
mhm,
But you're right,
yeah,
and I just want to add, because you're so right. It's to and actually, there's a really cool thing on the Criterion Collection release of this disc. There actually is a short or medium length ish documentary on James Wong
mm,
Howe, and part of that is actually him almost like giving a lesson, if you will, or kind of teaching like a little class on lighting. He's actually on a set, and they've actually got a couple actors, and they've got an interior set on a sound stage, and he actually is showing like, okay, turn on this light, let's turn on this, let's adjust this, make this hotter, turn this down. And he actually is like illustrating right there in this documentary. He walks you through how he would light a scene, and you couldn't be more right. What we would see with our eyes and what film, especially stocks of that era, would see, totally night and day difference. And to be able to light these scenes like this, and again, it's hard to iterate, but not just light it um, where it looks good for one or two characters, but we're talking every one of these scenes has multiple layers of actors at, in different layers of depth in the frame, where everybody is important, everyone is well lit, and then to take it even a step further, that the lighting is also hand in hand. It is telling, it is reinforcing the story, it
mhm,
is part of the storytelling. It's not just, oh, can we see the actors faces? It is actually part of the progression of the narrative, of a reinforcement of the emotion. And it just can't be more stated how difficult it is to do all those things, to
mhm.
get to have all those layers working at once.
No, totally, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, wow. Well, what have we not covered? Oh, and I just want to say too, God, and I'm such a fan of the cinematography in this film. I can't tell you how many times I have almost picked seconds. I have, like, there's so many times I've almost picked
Hmm.
seconds. Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
maybe we'll do it one of these days.
I've got a few of those as well, where it's like you just have those a few movies that have always just been sitting at like
Yeah,
second or third choice.
Yep,
And I've
yep,
always just
yep,
kind of
yep.
wondered, okay, when am I gonna jump on
Yeah,
that?
yeah, and maybe we'll do it. But of course, like I'd said earlier, that's another one that was shot by James as well. Um, but just fantastic. Just
Hmm.
and I thought too. I thought you would be really you would love the use of wide angle lenses and the low key
Hmm.
lighting. So
Yeah.
that was another reason why I picked it. I was trying to I had you in mind. I wanted to make sure
Yes. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know I know what a big fan you are. And it's funny when you and I think first met. I was coming more from a place of still photography at the time, and specifically like portrait photography. But I had kind of gone through a phase where I liked long lenses myself, but only because of just how beautiful faces look shot with longer lenses.
Hmm.
But I am. You have helped. You were a part of this process. I am a wide lens convert. Um, so I just I'm a big fan of a huge depth of focus,
Hmm.
and really really being able to utilize the depth of a frame. Well, what else? Is there anything else as we kind of get near the end of our
I
conversation
mean,
on the film?
briefly, I just want to mention that it's the music is done by Elmer Bernstein, who had just such an incredibly long career.
So many
It's kind of
films.
funny that the
Oh,
same guy that did this movie went on to do Ghostbusters. How many years? 30 years later, like,
and
um,
Meatballs, and
and
Animal
Meatballs,
House,
and
and
yeah, and
Airplane, the
all
Blues
those scores are
Brothers,
great. I mean, like
Stripes,
he
Trading
is great.
Places.
Yeah,
Yeah, Three Amigos. I mean, come
yeah.
on. Now, obviously, he didn't do the, I ain't afraid of no ghost, but
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately not. We
oh
didn't get Bernstein's debut single.
no, no, I mean, we touched on it throughout, but the performances are just so strong here. Tony Curtis is just outstanding in this film, in my opinion. I mean, Burt Lancaster is as well, but they are both
Hmm.
so good. They are both
Yeah,
so sharp here.
yeah,
I think Susan Harrison, her
yeah.
performance is understated, but it's appropriate for her character. Her character has very little voice. It's kind of the whole point that
And the
she
moment
is.
when you see her switch is so good too. Like she really pulls that off perfectly. When
Oh
she
well, and
switches
I
from being kind of a victim to deciding.
manipulator to
Yeah,
manipulator in a sense, and I
yeah.
just love. I mean, this is just an example as Sydney is walking out of the room realizing like he's been leveraged, by
Hmm.
her. Oh, you grew up fast, kid. But there's just all these great. Oh my God! I mean, seriously, I want to watch this and All About Eve and the many films that were so crisply written of this era and write my own script. It's like such an inspiration for me. Not that I want to write something in a 1950s kind of style of talking, but it's just such it's poetry. It's just
Hmm.
so fun to listen to, and it's like I'd never think that film. My emphasis with cinema is never on the dialogue because I'll continue to say that cinema is moving pictures. The medium is moving pictures, and so the visual is so vital. But God, when you have it all,
Hmm.
I mean, this could make a great stage play because the dialogue is so rich. But God, when you combine that with outstanding direction, outstanding blocking, outstanding performances, and the cinematography of the caliber that we have here, I mean, it's just the epitome to me. I love it all day, man. I
Hmm.
could just watch films like this all day, and I
Yeah.
mean, and for my money, this is so much more epic and interesting than Dune, like the new
Yeah.
Dune movies, and so much stuff that's big right now than any of these Marvel films. But that's just me.
I
What
mean,
can I
yeah. I
say?
mean, the last thing I think I'll just touch on too about that comparison, just real quick. This will be my closing thoughts.
All right.
Um, is just that there's a strong sense these days that so you watch a video montage of like the best cinematography or the best shots of 2025 or 2024 or
Yeah.
whatever, and so
Uh
much of
huh.
it that's in there is what I call like desktop wallpaper cinematography, which is just that stuff that is supposed to look kind of gimmicky, and like, as much as I try to avoid using the word gimmicky, um, it's just meant to look good for that frame,
Yeah.
and so that people can take a picture of it and upload it to whatever and be like, wow, look how cool this looks. And I've
Right.
never been interested in that sort of thing. And there's some very famous cinematographers that I find are, for lack of a better term, overrated because of that, because so much of their work is just about these like really complicated setups to get the most perfect looking, screenshotable image. And here you find the opposite of that. You find low-key, masterfully done cinematography that looks completely, natural for the moment and for the story, and that services the story. You could screenshot any moment from this movie and it would all look beautiful, and yet it would all tell so much about what it is that you're seeing, what it is you're looking at, what characters in power here, who's not, versus just trying to be technically perfect and proficient and good looking. So I think those are my closing thoughts about this.
Okay.
Is that
Excellent.
I agree with you. I think that I would rather watch this and be more amazed by the craftsmanship here than I would, like you said, with Dune or with
To me, it's so inspiring. And again, I don't want to be disparaging against Dune or those other films and the people who were
Mr.
part of making it. I
Villeneuve.
don't want to, that's not the point. But it's just that, what can I say? This kind of thing flips my skirt. Well, all right. Well, Cullen, we're at the end of another episode. And I'll be looking forward to your pick. And for everybody out there listening, we always appreciate you. If you have any suggestions for what films you might like us to cover in the future, we're on all the socials, so you can get a hold of us there and let us know. But with that being said, until next time, kids, we'll see you on the flip side.
Bye-bye.